I am James Kerwin, and this is my Trekzone conversation.
James, thanks so much for joining me on today's podcast, man.
Thank you for having me.
Now, tell us a little bit about your involvement in Star Trek fan films. Where have you come from?
My background, actually prior to SDC, was very much not in Star Trek fan films. I started directing about 20 years ago. I got my degree in film directing from a school here called TCU in Dallas-Fort Worth, and moved out to LA shortly afterwards, and directed features and shorts and music videos and things like that. And that was kind of my background. And I was doing a short film that Vic Mignogna starred in, was one of the stars of. And while we were working on that short film, he had gone into production on the first episode of Star Trek Continues. And he kind of pulled me aside and he said, "Hey, James, I want to show you this Star Trek fan film I'm doing." And I will admit, I silently rolled my eyes and thought, "Oh no, Star Trek fan film. Do I have to watch this?" But Vic was a nice guy, and I was just like, "All right, I'll appease him and watch this."
He sucks you in with that charm, doesn't he?
Yeah, totally. And I was just like, I didn't want to hurt his feelings. I was just like, I had not seen a lot of Star Trek fan films before. I was not very familiar with that world. I had seen a few. Some of them I thought were very good, very professional. The majority of them I thought, frankly, we're not. And that's not a slight. I think anybody who makes a Star Trek fan film, God bless them. It is a tremendous achievement. But if you don't have a background in film production or directing or screenwriting, it shows, frankly, And so I didn't know what I was to expect by watching Vic's. And I knew that he was an industry professional, so I did have some high hopes, and I watched it, and I was absolutely blown away. And I just said, "Vic, this is the original series. I can't believe you guys have done this." And shortly thereafter, he said, "Would you like to come on board and start directing for us?" So the rest is history.
What were what was the best episode you felt that you directed from the series?
Ooh, the best that I directed. I have to say my personal favorite is episode 3, Fairest of Them All, just because it was the first one that Kipley and I were a part of, but it was also, it's the mirror universe. It was just so fun. Mm-hmm. It was, he's like, you can't. It's so fun doing the mirror universe, and I think if you ask any director of any of the Star Trek series, they'll all tell you that. And so it was special because it was my first time, and I wrote the teleplay for that episode as well, which I did for the majority of them. And I don't know, it has a very special place in my heart. I wouldn't say it's the best episode we did, but it's my personal favorite, if that makes sense.
Now, Star Trek Continues was one of those big ones there during what I call the golden age of Star Trek fan films in the last few years. Guest stars, John Delancey, Michael Dorn, Doug Drexler, Jason Isaacs, Marina Sirtis. You know, what's it like to bring these people, amongst many others, onto the show and direct them?
It was wonderful, but it was very natural because it was never difficult in any way. All of those people that you just listed love the show, and they wanted to do it. It was, we didn't have to twist Jason Isaacs' arm. We didn't have to twist John Delancey's arm or any of the people that you just said. They watched the show. They said, "This is amazing. We want to be a part of it." And, absolute professionals on set to work with. And it was no, I will say this. I was a big Doctor Who fan growing up. I was much more into Doctor Who, frankly, than Star Trek. I know your audience will burn me at the stake for saying that, but I wasn't like a huge Trek fan growing up. I was a big Doctor Who fan. And when I was growing up, Colin Baker was kind of my doctor. He was like, when I was, at the, like 10, 11, 12 years old, he was the Doctor. And so I always, had this fantasy of one day working with Colin Baker and Nicola Bryant. And I got to do that on Star Trek Continues, which was just an absolute dream. That was really super cool. I fanboyed over them much more than I did over any of the other guest stars.
Now, of course, we can't forget Grant Imahara and Chris Doohan as well as part of the cast. Grant himself being on Mythbusters and living out. I got to meet Grant when he was out here a couple of years ago, and it's living out that fantasy, and that's very much what Star Trek fan films were, weren't they? It was just a group of mates getting together and play acting, almost, dare I say?
Yeah, and I mean that's why people did it. I mean, we had people like Grant who just for him. Growing up as a child, seeing Sulu on television, that was an inspiration for him. That was wonderful, and so he jumped at the chance to do this. It is great, and of course, having somebody like Chris Doohan, son of James Doohan, filling in that role, and he didn't really have like an acting background, and he was a little hesitant about doing it at first, and they kind of had to persuade him to do it, and I'm so glad he did because he's just a dead ringer for Scotty.
Well, let's take you back because I sort of started a little forward. You have your own Wikipedia page, and it tells me that you went to Parkway Central High School, and you had some adaptations of Shakespearean plays.
Well, don't believe anything you read on Wikipedia, first of all.
Is it true?
But yeah, I did.
Did you write this page yourself?
When I first moved to Los Angeles, I fell into directing theater, which I didn't really have a background in. And so I was a little hesitant at first, but I had always loved Shakespeare from a literary point of view. And so I directed some Shakespearean adaptations. I directed Venus and Adonis as a stage play, which is a very rare Shakespeare piece. I directed an apocryphal piece called Carneo. I did a short film based on Midsummer Night's Dream. I've always kind of had an affinity for Shakespeare, even though it doesn't tend to be very profitable. There's something about it that's just really engaging to direct, I think.
So from theatre, did that really set you up for your track into film directing, or is it vastly different?
It's vastly different. It's very, very different. My degree was in film directing. I never really thought I would get into theater. But theater is really good training for working with actors because theater is very much an actor's medium. When that curtain goes up, you are not in charge anymore as a director. You can't call cut. You can't use a different take. You can't use a different angle, So it is very much an exercise in letting go of control and letting your actors take charge, so to speak, which is I think is very hard for a film director to do sometimes. So it's good training and it's a good learning experience and theater is also, it's not just a stepping stone to doing something else. It's its own thing. I don't like it when people think of theater as, oh, well, it's the first step in going on to directing something else. No, it's an end in and of itself. Theater is its own thing, and I love it. And I still do it from time to time. Every couple of years, usually, I'll direct a stage play here in LA because it's just a wonderful. It's its own experience. Let's put it that way.
Well, look, we all know what happened there a couple of years ago with the change in the landscape of fan films. Things changed and SDC was forced to wrap. Let's bring it back to SDC. What was that like to get that news and not only to get the news but also to be allowed to wrap up production?
Well, it's funny because there's this idea I think among fans that Star Trek Continues was forced to prematurely end against our will, and that could not be further from the truth. The reality is that CBS Paramount was always extremely generous with us, and they let us end our series on our own terms. Now, yes, we did, out of courtesy to them, accelerate the pace of production. But we did what we wanted to do. We had hoped to make maybe a couple more episodes than we did. We had hoped to maybe do like a 13 episode season instead of 11. But they didn't. It's not like they came in and said, I think people have this myth that they came in and said, hey, you can only do 11 episodes and then you have to stop. That cannot be further from the truth. All that happened is that when we did our final fundraiser, which we had announced already, this is our final fundraiser. We're not going to do another one after this. We're hoping to raise enough to do 6 more episodes. But however much we raise on our crowdfunding, that's how many episodes we'll make. Well, we raised enough money to do 4 more episodes. So that's what we did. CBS Paramount never put a restriction on our timetable. They never put a restriction on the number of episodes we had to do or anything like that. They did want it to come to an end as quickly as was reasonably possible for us. But the episode count was something that was solely dictated by the amount of money that we raised in our last crowdfunder. And there was no interference by the powers that be. Let me put it that way. They didn't, tell us you can't do this, you have to do this, and it wasn't like that. We're very happy that we were able to end it the way we wanted to, with the story that we wanted to end it with.
The guidelines were also dropped. What were your feelings about those?
Right. I think that this may be an unpopular opinion among fan filmmakers, but I think that by releasing the guidelines of 2016 that CBS Paramount did, I think that was a very generous thing on their part. And let me explain why. There's this perception that people have that the guidelines are somehow restrictions, that and many will say they're unnecessarily restrictive to fan filmmakers. And I think what people don't understand, and maybe just working in Hollywood for all this time and doing stuff in the film and television industry, you kind of have a different perspective on enforcement of intellectual property and copyright and trademark, and how critically how important that is to franchise owners. The creators' rights, the rights of creators to protect their own intellectual property, is very sacrosanct to those of us who work here. And CBS Paramount has always been extremely generous with fan filmmakers. For 15 years or more, they have been. But there have always been guidelines, and this is what people, I think, don't understand. CBS Paramount have always had guidelines on Star Trek fan films, and the guidelines prior to 2016 were 3 words: all rights reserved. That was the guidelines. And what that meant was they could or could not shut down any fan film they wanted at any point in time, for whatever reason or no reason they saw fit to do so. That's what all rights reserved means. And there were fan film productions that were shut down prior to 2016, and there were ones that were not shut down prior to 2016. All the 2016 guidelines did was basically say, hey, look, we're going to give you a list of voluntary guidelines that if you follow these, we pinky swear we won't shut you down. If you don't follow these guidelines, you're in the same boat as you've been for the past 15 years. Maybe we'll shut you down, maybe we won't. It's up to us on a case-by-case basis. And that's exactly what they said. They said in the Engage podcast when they discussed the guidelines in detail. It's a case-by-case thing, just like it always has been, if you choose not to follow the guidelines. But if you choose to, we pinky swear we won't shut you down. Now, I think that's a really cool thing, because basically what they've done is, I don't view the guidelines as a restriction. I view it almost as an opening of the door a little bit to say, hey, look, if you do this, if you follow these things voluntarily, you're golden. I think that's great. How many franchises do that? I mean, I know there are others that do, but I think it's a wonderful thing. And since those guidelines came out, there have been productions that did not follow them that weren't shut down, and there have been productions that did not follow them that were shut down. So, I don't view them as some type of draconian thing at all, and I wish people wouldn't do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and it was my first reaction to them. That they actually leveled the playing field, really. As an Australian filmmaker, it allowed me, and this is certainly no way a slight on Continues, New Voyages, or any of those other big productions that were out there at the time, but the way that fan films were going, and it was sort of like an arms race, and everyone was getting bigger and bigger and bigger and better, and that was awesome for quality and all the rest of it. But then there were the little guys like me, all the way down here in Australia, trying to jump up and down and squeak in my mousy voice and go, hey, what about me? When the guidelines came along and they dictated certain things, it really leveled that playing field and open it up for everybody at the cost of some of the great productions. But you know, as you said, STC was wrapping, and there was going to be a point where you guys had finished and what had come next. So you know, and the other thing as well, people bemoan though the guidelines and go, but you know, Disney and Lucasfilm aren't doing that with Star Wars, and yet you look at the guidelines from them, you can only use music and sound effects from their downloaded zip file. You can, you know, for an official fan film blessing, you can only enter it into the fan film competition. It has to be less than 5 minutes, you know, 30 seconds is the short. So what CBS and Paramount have basically done, you know, unfortunately, there was a certain individual that decided that those 3 words weren't enough, and he needed dot points in how to behave, which is really unfortunate.
and you know, that's a great point, because although the guidelines, you know, like I said, they are guidelines, not laws, and if you break them, you may be shut down, you may not. Star Trek Continues released 4 episodes that did not follow those guidelines after the guidelines came out, and they didn't block any of them. But the practical impact of the guidelines was, yes, basically that the fan films made by professionals at that top level of quality aren't really being made anymore. But there's nothing wrong with that, because we have plenty of professional Star Trek content being made right now. We've got a TV series, we've got films, we've got another TV series coming out, and probably more after that. And again, like, when you're playing in somebody else's intellectual property sandbox, you always have to be keenly aware that at any point in time you have to stop. And the great thing about CBSP for so long has been they let so many people do it, as long as the big unwritten rule, and you and I both know what the big unwritten rule is, you don't pay yourself a salary. As long as you don't pay yourself a salary, everything went fine. And then when people tried to do that, everything hit the fan. And you know what? CBSP had no choice in that matter. They had to. I would have done the exact same thing if I owned a franchise and somebody was trying to do that off my franchise.
But
there's
James,
nothing wrong with what they did.
But James, what happens if I want to work full time on my hobby and my fan film? Who's going to pay the bills?
Well, hey, you know,
why do I have to work a full-time job so that I can have a hobby?
You shouldn't have to.
And I mean, this is
I admire your sense of entitlement.
Well, look, I mean, but this was the biggest thing, and I always look at it, and I do have to choose my words carefully, because I feel one way, but I have friends out there that that run their own podcasts and have Patreon campaigns, and you know, they cover the server costs and all that sort of stuff in Patreon campaigns and that sort of stuff, and crowdfunding to do fan films and all that sort of stuff. And good on them if you can get the money to have people help you. You know, that all the better, and you've got a bit more money to tell a bit of a better story. But at the end of the day, the way that I've settled down, and I've tried Patreon campaigns, and I've tried crowdfunding and all that sort of stuff, and I've always failed. So there is a bit of jealousy in there, I'll freely admit that. But then there's also the realization, and it came to me last week, that for me personally with Trekzone, I don't want any stakeholders. I don't want to be reliant on people to continue my hobby. And I don't want I don't want to be beholden to them, basically, where I have to meet a certain quotas and targets and performance and all that sort of stuff, which is why I dropped $5,000 on my own fan film. And all right, I've got actors on a green screen reading off scripts, but that was the way it looked good in the Ron Howard masterclass. That's all I'm going to say. That's where I grabbed it and I put it on screen and I went, didn't quite work, but you know what? I learned the lesson out of it, and the next one is going to be better. I also learnt how not to shoot on a full wall green screen because there was so much spill. But
Yes.
So did you enjoy your time with STC?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It was tremendous fun. It is really the best word for it, because you're playing, you get to play Star Trek and you get to tell really compelling morality tales, I think, and both writing and directing them with people that you really enjoy working with. I mean, we really were a really fun loving family. And it was great. Would I do it again? No. Because it was a lot of work. And you're working and you're putting in long hours, and not just writing the episodes and directing the episodes, but then post-production and promoting them and everything, and you're not getting paid for that. And it's an enormous amount of work, and you can't really be working on other projects while you're doing it if you want to do it in excellence. So I wouldn't do it again. But I had a blast doing it. It was a lot of fun.
And how does it feel knowing that those sets that you worked on and that were built for STC and Vic poured so much love into are now with a new custodian, with Ray Tesi, and they're going to see continued use?
Yeah, I think it's great that someone was willing to take them over, because I would hate to see. I mean there's a lot of square footage there that those sets take up, and rent and utilities in that building are not cheap, and it was not something that Star Trek Continues, now that we've finished production and aren't raising any more money, could possibly afford to maintain. So it was really. It would have been a tragedy for those things to have been dismantled. Because not, and you know what? I'll say this: when you go into production on any film or television series, once it ends, the sets are dismantled, and that's always sad. And I think any director will tell you, "Oh, it's sad. I've worked for the last 4 years on this TV series. Now the sets are being taken apart." But it's just part of life in production. But these sets are iconic, and so much blood, sweat, and tears went into them that it would have been such a shame to see them taken apart. So I'm so glad that Ray came along and said, "You know what? I'm going to take over the lease, and I will continue to be a great steward and maintain these things." So I think I'm thrilled about it. I think it's great.
All right, man. Well, look, the last topic that I wanted to cover with you is a short film that you have released with several STC alumni, Vic included, John Delancey as well, When the Train Stops.
Oh, yes.
The short film. We should, of course, have a bit of a plug for you while you're on the show. What brought the short film around?
When the Train Stops was a project that was conceived by Michael Forrest's family. Michael Forrest, who played Apollo in the original series and reprised that role of Apollo in the first episode of Star Trek Continues. His wife and her sister developed this project. Her sister is a writer and wrote the script for this. The story stars Michael Forrest, and they wanted to kind of get it off the ground as a short film. And so they brought Lisa Hansel, who is the producer and makeup supervisor of Star Trek Continues. They brought her on board to produce it and myself on board to direct it. And we got not only Michael Forrest, but Rekha Sharma and John Delancey and Vic, and a great young actor named Derek Jacobs, who plays this. I don't want to give too much away about the short film, but we had a great cast and a great time shooting it. It's an enormous amount of work, but I'm very, very happy with the way that it turned out. And we had some Star Trek Continues alumni on our crew as well. So the film just finished post-production last month. I know Lisa is entering it into a lot of festivals. We're looking for the right venue the right festival in which to premiere it. So I don't actually have a release date for you guys yet, but it will probably be sometime early to mid 2019. Maybe it will sometime in that area. I'm thinking it'll be available for people to buy.
Fantastic, James. Well, look, when that release date is announced and it gets closer, I reckon we should bring you back and we should have an in-depth chat about it. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing it. Absolutely.
I think you'll like it. I think people will like it. It was really fun to make, especially with those people, all of whom are good guys, you know. So
fantastic, James. Well, thank you so much for having a Trekzone conversation today.
Thank you for having me.